Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Ward, filling in this week for Daryl, who's enjoying some much-deserved downtime. Thanks for joining us on APTN InFocus today. We're talking about Indigenous firsts, from astronauts and pilots to a pathologist. We'll be speaking with some Indigenous people who are blazing a trail and making some history. Of course, we want you to join in on our conversation. You can also tweet us at APTN InFocus, or send us an email. That's infocus@aptn.ca. Before I introduce you to our guests, here's a look at some Indigenous firsts we've covered in the past. In 2018, Captain Robyn Shlachetla and First Officer Robyn Beardy took flight for the first time as the first female Indigenous medevac crew in Manitoba. The team flies to northern communities across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Nunavut.
When I started my career, I didn't know of other Indigenous female aviators until Robyn. So it was on my bucket list. I really wanted to fly with her.
Yesterday, I actually got to fly into my home community for a medevac flight.
Brigette Lacquette of Mallard, Manitoba, became the first First Nations woman to play for Team Canada in the 2018 Winter Olympics. At 25 years old, the defensive player brought home a silver medal.
I feel like I've opened a lot of doors.
She then became the first Indigenous woman to scout for an NHL team when she was hired on with the Chicago Blackhawks in 2021. In 2022, NASA's Colonel Nicole Mann became the first Indigenous woman to blast off into space. The Wailaki woman posted photos to Twitter while on board the SpaceX's Dragon.
I was excited to be a part, I think, of this team that explores space and human exploration, right? And the development of things that are going to benefit humans back on Earth. To me, that makes me very excited, and I just feel fortunate to be a part of it.
Métis pilot Tara Fraser became the first Indigenous woman to own her very own airline in Canada. Originally from Hay River, Northwest Territories, she launched her aerotech company in January of this year.
Just launched Bird Aero, all things innovation in aerospace and aviation.
And some really great firsts there. One of the most public firsts for an Indigenous person and an Indigenous woman is, of course, the current Governor General. Mary Simon was born in Kangikswaladuik, Nunavik. On July 26, 2021, she was sworn in as Canada's first Indigenous Governor General and the 30th Governor General since Confederation. We had a chance to speak with her on Tuesday. Governor General Mary Simon, thanks so much for being with us this week on InFocus. Today we're celebrating Indigenous firsts, and you are, of course, the first Indigenous person, the first Indigenous woman to hold the title of Governor General. What significance do you think that holds for Indigenous women and for Indigenous peoples?
I think in terms of the significance, it is significant because we've been working at the national and international level to be partners and to work together with other Canadians in the process of our own future. So the fact that I am an Indigenous person and the first Indigenous Governor General, many people have told me over the months and year that to them it's a really great thing that has happened in our country, that it signifies that Indigenous issues are critically important to the country and that we can work in partnership. So I have received a lot of positive feedback on the fact that I'm now the Governor General.
Are there moments in your life that stick out to you that led you to this appointment?
I suppose there is. There's many things that happened in my 75 years, and it's one of these things that only come over time, and there are significant milestones that I've had in my own work, and they relate to both working at the regional level and then being a board member on many regional organizations, and also at the national level being the national leader also being the president of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, which is the international organization that represents the Inuit of Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Russia. And now, and then when I was ambassador for Circumpolar Affairs at Foreign Affairs here in Ottawa, I was the lead negotiator for the establishment of the Arctic Council that includes 8 Arctic countries. And so on. So, and then I was ambassador to Denmark. So there's been many things that have happened in my lifetime that have had a significant impact on me personally. And when I read my biography, it illustrates that I have been involved in many different aspects of not just Northern Inuit issues, but also internationally as well as nationally with other Indigenous leaders, especially during the constitutional negotiations that led up to the recognition of Indigenous Aboriginal rights in the Canadian Constitution.
As you pointed out there, you were also the first ambassador for Circumpolar Affairs for a decade. How do you think that work influenced your work as Governor General?
I learned a lot of things that I held during my term as ambassador, and a lot of that has to do with building bridges, and I've done that throughout my life, building bridges between people, Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. And when I was in Denmark, as well as Circumpolar Ambassador here in Ottawa, there are a lot of activities that require diplomacy, and I learned a lot of things about diplomacy that I use here in my job as Governor General. So these types of things that you've learned have a way of coming back to help you develop the kind of interchange and interactions that you have with other peoples across the country. My role right now is representing the King of England, but also I'm responsible here in Canada for the work on reconciliation on behalf of Rideau Hall. So these are really important aspects of the role of a Governor General, aside from the usual, responsibilities, constitutional responsibilities that I carry as the Governor General. There are a lot of other areas that I work on, and one of those areas is definitely bringing people together, and also to talk about who we are, and to develop and create spaces where people will live side by side with respect, with dignity, expressing their culture and their language with respect. So I think this is a long-term project, no doubt, but I'm certainly taking it seriously during my term as Governor General.
When the call came for the appointment to Governor General, was that still a shock for you? Was it something that you had to weigh, or was that an automatic yes right away?
In terms of working, it was pretty automatic, but in terms of my personal life, we had required some discussion with family members. I have 12 grandchildren that had a say in it, and my children. So it was a discussion in the family. But in terms of the work, I saw this position as a way of continuing the work that I had done through other organizations at a non-governmental level, especially. Creating new opportunities for people, working at the United Nations on the establishment of the UN Indigenous Peoples Declaration. So all these areas I felt could really contribute to the work that the Governor General does in Canada. So it was a surprise, but it was a very positive surprise, and I didn't have to think too long to make a decision. So my husband was always very supportive as well, so it made the job of accepting easier.
Yeah, a lot of time to be away from the grandkids. You come from a family of trailblazers. What influence did your parents and your upbringing have on your life and career?
My upbringing is very significant to me, and it plays a role in my life every day, because I come from a family, like my mother was an Inuk, and my grandmother was also an Inuk, and they only spoke Inuktitut. And my father was from Manitoba, a non-Indigenous person, but he went to the Arctic when he was 18 and learned the language very quickly. So when he met my mother, he could already speak the language, so there were really no barriers to the love that they found for each other. And they played a very significant role, because on a day-to-day level, we learnt the Inuit culture and language from my mother and grandmother, and my father taught us to survive out on the land as he was taught by Inuit when he first went to the Arctic in the cold climate of winter. So these are things that have played a significant role in my life, and it's like living in two worlds. When I'm up north back home, I go into my Inuit culture without thinking about it. And when I live in Ottawa at Rideau Hall, I can also live the way of life that they have in the southern part of the country. So I'm very lucky, I'm very fortunate to have been brought up this way, and it has really helped me in my work.
During your time as Governor General, there's been a lot of historic firsts as well, from the Pope's apology to the meeting of the new monarch. What are some of the things that stand out for you so far in the role?
Well, these are all very significant events that I've been involved in, unexpected ones in some ways, and they have really we've spent a lot of time dealing with these significant events, and I think that the fact that I'm fortunate enough to be involved at this level allows me to learn more and more about the international community, and also to bring that back into my work to see how we can improve different things in our own land, in our own homeland. As well, we can also share with other countries what we have done in our country. For instance, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and its report. There are countries now that are doing similar types of activities and working on renewed relationship with other Indigenous peoples that live in those countries. So it's really something that is, it really does tie into the discussion on the rule-based world order that we all depend on every day. And we contribute to that as Indigenous people to a great deal.
We hear a lot about some of the challenges that Indigenous peoples face in public life, public service as a politician, especially Indigenous women, but many people look to your appointment as an inspiration. What advice would you have for those who do want to enter the public service?
Well, I think any job in life can be challenging. And when I was beginning my work back in the early 70s, I was often the only woman in board meetings. And you look to see what role women play today, and it's come a long way, but I think that we still have to work on this issue. I think gender equality continues to be an issue, and I often find that when you make decisions for our families and our communities and our country, the best decisions that come out of this is when men and women work together and find the best solution to problems or challenges that we face. So I'm a big supporter of engagement of both men and women in the workplace, and we need to do more. Inspirational, I think as women, we find what we enjoy doing in life, whether it's a job or at home with children, and that's a decision each and every one of us have to make. But when we face challenges, what's important is to believe in yourself and to also think about what your priorities are and the decisions you make for you and your family, and carry that throughout your work, and try and resolve the challenges and not walk away from them. I know it's difficult sometimes not to walk away, But there have been times in my life, in my career, where I had those types of challenges, and I almost walked away a few times, but I didn't. And in the end, you earn the respect that you deserve. So challenging times, just think of yourself as an individual, believing in yourself, and keep going.
Wise words there indeed. You know, some of the big events that have happened that you touched on, there was really no way to predict some of those were going to happen, but are there things on the horizon that you're looking forward to?
Well, as we know, we have a new king, and I'm the representative in Canada, and there will be a big event in London in May, so I will be attending the coronation of King Charles, and that to me is exciting, and it's an event that doesn't happen very often. I think the last time it happened was when the late Queen Elizabeth had her coronation. That's over 70 years ago, so it's been a long time. So this is an event that doesn't happen very often. So I think it's really important to continue that relationship. And especially when I think of King Charles, and he was here before he was king last May, he was very interested in dialogue with the Indigenous leaders, and he continues to have a high interest in that dialogue. So hopefully we can continue the Inuit to Crown or Indigenous to Crown relationship building. I'm hoping that will happen in the coming months and years.
Governor General Mary Simon, inspiration for sure. Appreciate you taking some time for us here.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Still to come, we'll speak with the first Native American in space, the first Indigenous Auditor General, and right after the break, we'll speak with Kona Williams, the first and only forensic pathologist in Canada. Stick around. Welcome back. We're putting Indigenous firsts in focus this week. And our next guest is not only the first, but she remains the only First Nations forensic pathologist in Canada. Kona Williams' work has become very personal in recent years with the discovery of suspected unmarked graves at sites of former residential schools, as her dad is a survivor. We spoke with Kona earlier. For being with us on the show this week.
Thank you for inviting me.
You know, this isn't the most common career path. Obviously, you're the first and the only so far. How did you get started in this work?
It was also mostly by serendipity. I wasn't even planning on going to medical school when I was in undergrad. I wanted to be a research scientist and do science for the rest of my life. And you know, my grades were good. I had some good people who encouraged me, and I applied to medical school and ended up going. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I'll be a doctor now. And met some really good people, really good teachers, really good mentors along the way. Explored lots of different options, but fell in love with something called pathology, which is, you know, not typically the thing that most medical students kind of jump into right when they start. But I liked the thinking around it, the diagnosis. I liked, you know, sort of getting that diagnosis and understanding what's going on with somebody, you know, on that cellular level. And then the system changed in Ontario, the death investigation system, right when I was in residency in pathology, and got introduced to some phenomenal forensic pathologists, and they roped me in. So here I am.
What's a typical day like for yourself?
It varies. You know, it's never boring. I'm actually one of the few people, I think, who gets up in the morning and actually wants to go into work. You know, there's some days where I'm in the morgue and I'm doing autopsies. And there's other days where I'm teaching. I do quite a lot of that. I testify in court as an expert witness. And, you know, I also run the lab here. So I'm the lab medical director for Health Sciences North. I direct the forensic pathology unit up here in Sudbury. So there's always a lot to do with that. And I've recently been appointed to the National Advisory Committee on Residential Schools, Missing Children, and Unmarked Burials. So that is really, that's fascinating work. It's a lot of hard work, but the career that I have allows me to be able to do all those things.
You know, your father is a residential school survivor. How has working on this files affected you personally or your family?
It's heavy work. It was not something that I had been initially thinking of when I first got into forensic pathology, but then I realized that this career that I have could really have a good impact on this whole situation. It's devastating to me personally, but at the same time, I am here because of my family, and they attended residential school. My ancestors, they gave me the strength to do this, and so to me, it's a way of giving back, of using what I have and the knowledge I have, the skills that I have. To try and give back and to get some answers. The whole residential school system was designed so that people like me wouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here, but here I am. And I'm quite honored to be able to do this work.
What was the reaction of your family, your parents, when you wanted to go into this? And I'm guessing they're pretty proud of you being the first and only.
Well, my dad actually expected me to be a lawyer. When I told him I got into medical school, he laughed. He's like, I thought you were going to be a lawyer. You never lose an argument. But the next kind of thought was, it'll be really good to have a doctor in the family. I don't think they were quite expecting me to be the doctor for the dead. They're thinking family doctor, emergency physician. But yeah, his weird daughter just went this route, and I'm absolutely loving it. It's a great career to be in, and it's a good time to be where I am.
As a groundbreaker in the profession of forensic pathology, you mentioned you had some good role models, some good mentors, but was it different not having a First Nations or an Indigenous role model to somebody that went before you?
In this profession, yes. Because I'm the only First Nations forensic pathologist that I know of. That carries a lot of responsibility. So it is. It's stressful. Sometimes it can be very challenging, especially when you're dealing with, the deaths of Indigenous people and First Nations people. Like in Thunder Bay, I did a lot of the autopsies from that area. So I understand a lot of how these deaths are happening and why. But at the same time, it's very hard to do these cases because, I look at these people. They have families waiting for answers. And I realize how easily that could have been me, and how easily, that could have been my family. And it's a lot of responsibility to do that, and to be sort of the face of this from a First Nations perspective. I was appointed as the First Nations liaison for the Ontario Forensic Pathology Service, and that was a lot of weight and responsibility. But at the same time, I thought to myself, I can do this, and hopefully there will be others. There will be other First Nations forensic pathologists coming, and if I can help them, get to this point, then even if it's one person, I've done a good job.
You mentioned your work with the unmarked graves. Your expertise is no doubt in demand. What has all this meant for your work at this time in history?
To me, it's just like serendipity. I'm just here at the right time, the right place, with the right skills and the right knowledge, and it seems like it was meant to be that. I could have been a cytopathologist. I could have been any other type of pathologist, and maybe this wouldn't have occurred the way that it did. But because I chose this particular subspecialty, it really has allowed me to be able to contribute. And again, it's not the easiest job, even in the best days, but this kind of work really, I think it's fulfilling. It's going to be very challenging in the next several years, actually. But I think I'm ready, and I'm in the right spot to be able to handle it.
This is, even before the suspected unmarked graves and that work, this is a pretty heavy profession all around. How do you help keep yourself grounded?
Well, I always like to say, my job is very interesting. And I always have to keep in mind, as difficult as some of the cases can be, that there are families waiting for the answers that I can, hopefully provide. There are communities waiting. And that gives me, it sort of grounds me and allows me to focus and think on, well, what would people want to know? What would families want to know about how this person died? Outside of medicine and outside of my job, I always think I'm really boring. I have, gardens and dogs, and I'm actually really kind of more of a homebody. So that, to me, this job does allow me time to relax in the way that I like, and it's peaceful where I live. So that's also very good. It's good for the spirit, really. So all of that together, I have good colleagues that I can rely on if I have questions, or if I'm having a difficult time. So it's a very good position to be in, and I don't feel terribly overwhelmed at all.
Why would you say it's important to have Indigenous First Nations coroners?
We do have a few First Nations coroners that I'm aware of, but there aren't enough people in death investigation. There aren't enough Indigenous people in the death investigation system. And to have that perspective, to have that level of knowledge and that comfort that can be provided to families and grieving families, that understanding, I think is extremely important to be able to sort of bridge those two worlds. Because, we see what happens when there's that lack of understanding. There's still quite a lot of racism in the healthcare system in general. And that's, that includes the death investigation system. So to have Indigenous people involved in this, at these, in these positions and these careers, I think is extremely important to improving the lives and the deaths of Indigenous people in this country.
Sounds like it could be a bit of a daunting job. What are we talking, 7-10 years of education here?
Yeah, it's a long haul. After high school, it's typically like 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, 5 years of pathology residency, and a year of fellowship. So you're looking at like 14 years of post-secondary education. Wow. Now, forensic pathology, luckily, is not the only forensic job. There's lots of jobs that can be, that are peripheral or that are, that we really rely on: photography, anthropology, odontology, so dentists, all of these careers that we rely on people. We work as a team. So there's lots of opportunities in forensics, but pathology is probably definitely the longest one in terms of education.
That is a lot, yeah. Well, that said, though, what advice would you have for other Indigenous youth who are looking to enter your field, and why it's important that they do?
Yeah, we need you. I would say we need you desperately. And to be curious, ask questions, do not be afraid of failure. It's the best teacher. And there are people now who can help guide you. Reach out to them. I for one, will talk your ear off about forensic pathology, but don't be afraid. And it is possible to do this. It's not impossible. I did it, and I'm not, the best person out there. So I'm not like a genius, and, I don't have tons of money or anything like that, but it is possible. And I would really encourage people to look at it. And start off, get the good grades, work hard, be curious. If you love science and you're like me, then this is a good career.
Must be have been a pretty great feeling to be the first and so far the only First Nations Indigenous pathologist. But you must be looking forward to welcoming that second person.
Oh yeah, if there are First Nations people in medical school, reach out. I'll happily talk to you about this as a potential career, and anybody who's even thinking about going further, like into medicine or any of the healthcare fields. Always happy to talk to them and talk their ear off about whatever they like.
Well, Kona, it was great to talk with you this week, and thank you for the work that you do. It's not for everybody, that's for sure.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
To outer space now. Our next guest traveled to the International Space Station in the Space Shuttle Endeavour in 2002. Former NASA astronaut and U.S. Navy officer John Bennett Harrington is of Chickasaw heritage. Harrington was also the first Native American astronaut to accomplish space travel and a spacewalk. When he went to the International Space Station, he carried eagle feathers, arrowheads, wooden flutes, and flags of the Chickasaw and Crow nations. We caught up with John earlier. John, amazing to have you with us. Appreciate you doing this.
It's my pleasure, Dennis. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. Can you tell us a bit about how you became an astronaut?
Oh, long story, but I'll make it real short. I was in the Navy for about 22 years. I was a naval aviator, test pilot. I dreamed about being an astronaut when I was about 8 years old, but I never thought it was something I could do until I was in test pilot school and realized that the people I used to watch on TV, I was in the same school, doing the exact same thing. So if they could do it, why not me? And I applied and I earned a master's to make myself competitive, and very fortunate to be selected in 1996.
8 years old, so that's a long dream you were chasing there.
You know, it's a dream. We all have dreams growing up, right? But how realistic are those dreams? And it's not until you do certain things in your life, you meet certain people, that things kind of fall into place, and that dream now becomes reality.
You know, the first Native American to do this, was it hard for you to break new ground?
I would say when I got to NASA, they told me I was the first member of a federally recognized tribe, as we say in the States here, citizen of Chickasaw Nation. And they said, you're the first person we've had in the office like that. And I didn't realize I was in that position, but I found being in that position was an incredible responsibility, and my need to share my story with others that I never had a role model. I take it very serious.
Did you have a role model yourself when you were going through all your training?
You know, growing up, I think the first time I ever met an astronaut, I was probably in test pilot school. I think one came to speak at one of the graduations, but you know, you see them in a distance. You know, I saw them on TV growing up, and then I find myself, you know, as an astronaut, you know, in meetings and sitting with people that I watched as a kid, that I admired growing up, and now I was in that same group, and so was I found it it was just kind of surreal in some respects, and I realized that, you know, they just like you are, and you have the same dreams and aspirations, and we all got to do it together.
John, I can barely get myself on the treadmill some days. How extensive was your training for this?
Wow. When you initially get selected as an astronaut, you train for about a year and a half just to understand the space shuttle, understand the station, understand the NASA structure. I mean, all these different things you learn. Once you get assigned to a mission, I trained for about 2 years for the mission. So the guy right behind me, that guy right there, it took me about 2 years to train for everything I did on the space shuttle, as well as doing spacewalk.
Were there moments where you wanted to give up, or did you know, I mean, you're going to get a chance of a lifetime here, kept you going?
Yeah, you only get one chance, right? And you may get one chance or two chances. You just work hard, and the nice thing is you work with people that are dedicated to what they do. A great group of folks. I had a great crew, and had a lot of support from friends and family too. So it was hard, but it was realistic.
So can you give us a sense, what is it like being in space?
Every kid's dream, I'll say that. I mean, one of the things that stands out was one of my mentors, a guy named Jerry Ross, who I worked for as an astronaut, flown in space on the shuttle 7 times. He said, at some point in your mission, stop and just take in what you see. Don't take a picture of it. Just realize that this is a unique environment you're in. So, matter of fact, the picture behind me on the end of the space station, I was hanging on by a thumb and a forefinger looking out into the vastness of the universe. The very first time in my life, there was nothing between me. I felt like there was nothing between me and whatever else is out there. And it was this incredible, I felt real insignificant, but it was a moment I'll never forget. It kind of goes into your soul for sure.
No kidding. Sounds slightly frightening to me. Was it scary at all?
There's one time I thought I wasn't tethered, so that kind of gets your attention. But, you know, You're working so hard, you just kind of forget where you are sometimes, and you realize, hang on kind of tight. That was fine. It just, you get so caught up in your work, you don't want to make a mistake. It's not a fear of dying. It's a fear of making a mistake that keeps you focused on your task, for sure.
Like you said, you only get 1 or 2 shots here. Is it hard to retire after such an exciting career?
Yeah, well, I flew on the shuttle in 2002. The mission after mine was Columbia, so I lost 7 friends on Columbia when it didn't come home. It broke up on reentry. Mm-hmm. I was training for a space station mission. I was going to command 2 Russians to the space station for 6 months, but I have a medical issue with my lower back. I have low bone mass, and so they're afraid I'd break my back on the Soyuz coming home. So I had a really tough decision. I could stay and fly the shuttle again. We weren't flying the shuttle, and so I made a tough decision, got offered a job as a commercial test pilot to go into the commercial space industry, and that's what I did. Regretted at times, watched my friends fly again, but you make decisions and you live with those decisions, and my life has been remarkable since I retired too, so I'm very fortunate. Awesome stuff.
John, what would be your message to young Indigenous people out there that are looking to enter this field?
Well, just, believe in yourself and believe in the people that believe in you, because people will come along in your life and they will encourage you to do something you may not be thinking about. I got kicked out of college when I was a freshman. I didn't study. I wasn't interested in school. But I worked for guys in the mountains as a rock climber on a surveying crew, and I saw math in practice for the first time. So I was encouraged by the people I worked with to go back to school, become an engineer, be somebody, work hard. You have to do something out of high school. You can't just expect your high school education is going to cover. So if there's something you want to do, find somebody doing it, talk to them, and go down that path. You may not get to the end goal, but have a fun journey along the way. I got interviewed to be an astronaut, and I thought that was the best thing in the world, and I got selected to be one. So, just work hard and believe the people that believe in you.
Awesome stuff, John. Remarkable stuff. Appreciate you taking some time here to share with us today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dennis. My pleasure. You guys have a nice day.
Still to come, we're going to check in with social media wizard Jesse Andrusko to see what you have to say about Indigenous firsts. We'll also speak with a guest who's not only the first Indigenous person in their field, they're also the first to identify as a member of the LGBTQ2S+ community. That's all coming up after the break. Welcome back. Today we're putting Indigenous firsts in focus, and we're going to go to social media now with our social media editor, that's his title, not wizard, Jesse Andrusko, to hear what some of you are saying about today's topic.
Thanks, Dennis. Online, we asked, what challenges do Indigenous people face in achieving firsts? We got a lot of good answers. Let's take a look. First from Mike, no training or guidance, non-caring for the youth, selfishness, and greed. Tracy simply said, funding and jurisdiction. From Taylor, challenges with mental health you either inherited or developed, or both because of generational curses. Jordan commented, stereotypes and stigma of the false education that the government has placed on them and us. Don said, the erasure of the preceding firsts so that we are always recreating the first when it actually is the 5th or 6th time we have broken through, but because right after it happens, we lose funding or supports. We have to rebuild and hit the same mark over and over again. Lastly, a funny one from Gwenna, first time I made Bannock First Family was a big challenge. Good stuff. Thank you all for taking the time to share. If you want to add your opinion about today's topic, here's how. Send an email to infocus@aptn.ca, like us on Facebook on our APTN News page, or follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus.
Thanks, Jesse. Please keep sending in your comments on your firsts. Our next guest gets to hold the government's feet to fire. As an Auditor General, Michael Pickup gets to head up investigations into government departments and programs. Michael's not only the first Indigenous Auditor General, he's the first Auditor General to identify as a member of the LGBTQ2S community. Great to see you again. Thanks for being with us on the show. Can you tell us a bit about your role as the Auditor General of British Columbia?
Sure. As quickly as I would sum it up, it really is the Auditor General. It really is that independent auditor of government. So essentially, if government does it, we can come and audit it. And I report as an independent officer to the Legislature of British Columbia.
Definitely one of the more important roles in all of government. Can you talk a bit about your career trajectory, how you got to where you are today?
You know, I'm a CPA, an FCPA now, so I'm a professional accountant. Spent 25 years with the Office of the Auditor General of Canada. Had an opportunity to work for wonderful Auditors General. And then in 2014, the Nova Scotia Legislature appointed me as Auditor General of Nova Scotia, and I spent 6 years there. And then I came to British Columbia in 2020 to start an 8-year term as Auditor General of British Columbia. So I would wrap it up, so to say, and been very fortunate to have pretty much either lived or worked in every area of Canada, including the 3 territories as well.
Very nice. One of the things you weren't lucky to have, I guess, was an Indigenous role model, somebody who had done this prior to you. What was it like to move into this work without somebody already having experienced that?
Yeah, and apparently, you know, being the first comes with that comes being the first. But I think I was very fortunate over a 25-year career at the Office of the Auditor General to work with people like, you know, previous Auditor General Sheila Fraser, who did a lot of work to advance, I think, Indigenous issues in Canada, but other Auditors General as well. And, you know, it was during her time, for example, that I was on the Employment Equity Committee, right? And she was very big on promoting equity. So I think, you know, I was fortunate to have had just great mentors and to have worked in, I think, fairly open environments. And I always say, you know, if it wasn't for all of those people, I certainly wouldn't be an Auditor General today.
For sure. How do you think your Indigenous perspective informs the work that you do?
Yeah, I think in twofold. I think it's one, I think it's how I show up. I think is the leadership approach, and I think really that is grounded on, you know, something I learned from certainly my Indigenous grandmother and my mother was, you know, a certain level of humility, that we're all equal. Right, just because I'm the Auditor General doesn't mean I get 51% vote on everything. It really has informed a collaborative approach where everybody is equal, and we were taught from the time we were kids, you know, that everybody was important, whether you were picking up garbage on somebody's street or you were Auditor General. So that really was a heavy influence on me, and I think a sense of humor. Right, you know, in my mother's family, they all have a wonderful sense of humor, which when you do a job like this, you know, is really helpful to have some level of sense of humor. And the other part, so that would be a leadership thing, but I think the other part is the audits that we're doing. Right, we do audits that, you know, we do the basics like control work, all of that is important, but then we do things like, you know, looking at Indigenous offenders in correctional centers, looking at vulnerable people during the pandemic who left violent situations. So it has informed not only, I think, how I approach work, but the actual work that we do as well.
Not only are you the first Indigenous auditor, but you're also the first LGBTQ2S auditor. What's the importance, do you think, of that as well? Yeah, and again, I'm not sure how many firsts I can be, I guess, but I think it really is just, you know, really before I think diversity and inclusion were as important in society as they are today. It really, I think, you know, sort of grounded me in terms of the leadership approach that I have carry out. So I think, you know, how we run things here, I always say, you know, when I leave an organization, I want it to be very inclusive of all people, to have diversity in the organization. So being GLBTQI2, again, I think it's a leadership approach where you're focused on people, the importance of people, zero tolerance for, you know, harassment, discrimination, any of these kind of things, because something that comes with a 35-year plus career, you know, we have lots of work to do in Canada today, absolutely, but it's less work than we had to do 35 years ago. Right. So I think it absolutely informs how I show up and the way that I think of people. As an auditor, do you get to choose the topics to investigate?
Absolutely. If government does it, we can pick whatever we want to do, and government doesn't get to say no. So as an independent officer of the legislature, we decide what we're going to audit, when we're going to audit, how we're going to audit. The only thing we don't do is we don't create public policy. We are the auditors of how government operates. So it's an absolutely fascinating role. That is just wonderful. But of course, that comes with a lot of responsibility in terms of picking audits that make sense.
Well, so you just looked at mental health services for Indigenous inmates. Why was that something that you chose to investigate?
Yeah, we thought it was important, again, because it's mental health, and mental health is important. We want to be doing audits as an organization. We want to be doing audits that have an Indigenous focus. That is important to us. And I was, sort of flipping through the last decade or so. There's been a number of audits done by the Office of the Auditor General of British Columbia that focuses on the Indigenous population. So again, we want to do audits that relate to Indigenous populations, and also you will see to other groups as well.
So I guess, the report found that things aren't going well in terms of mental health services for Indigenous inmates. Did you kind of know that going in, and what were some of the things that stuck out for you?
Yeah. To the question of do we know that going in, I've learned long ago in this profession, and often people will ask me, were you surprised? I've learned not to have surprise, because we go into these things open-minded, right? We go into it being objective, so we have a purpose. We're going in to audit a topic. We don't have our mind made up, right? That's why we will conduct. Like an audit like that takes about 3,000 to 4,000 hours of audit time. Right, this is not something we do in a couple hundred hours. So again, we want to be open-minded and objective. And in terms of the main findings, unfortunately, the overall conclusion was that the PHSA, the government essentially in BC, is not consistently delivering services to Indigenous offenders in correctional facilities as they have outlined in their policy. So they have some work to do. But I'm really pleased that they've accepted the recommendations and they're going to act upon it. And the actions are really tangible. So, you wonder why people like me do these kind of jobs, right? It's really hoping to make change.
Are you able to give us an indication of what you're looking into next?
Sure. So what we do is we keep sort of a work in progress on our website to keep people informed. So it's not a secret. So to give you some sense of some of the things we have coming up, we will be looking at, in March, we will be tabling an audit on fraud. And then fraud is an important topic to me, not surprisingly, as an accountant. Mm-hmm. But we also have an audit coming out in March on diversity and inclusion. So we're looking at how effectively government has managed its framework for putting diversity and inclusion strategy in place. So those are the two that are coming up in March. But likewise, we're looking at heavy topics like harm reduction. Right. So when you think of the overdose crisis that BC has had, we're in there auditing that to see how effective government is doing on harm reduction. So pretty important topics. And I think you asked me before about being, Indigenous and GLBTQI. Those types of things are reflected in the work we do. So while fraud and internal controls and this kind of stuff is important to me, likewise, things like diversity and inclusion audits, harm reduction, substance use, these kind of things are equally important. And that's reflected if you look in the output of the work that my office does. It's, on one hand, the typical type stuff, and then on the other hand, these other topics that are just so important to society.
Well, I assume we'll be having you back on the show sometime soon when those reports come down. Michael, just finally here, what would you say to Indigenous youth or Indigenous folks who are already in accounting out there looking to become an auditor?
Yeah, I would say certainly, we are always hiring, and we are looking to be more flexible and modern for Indigenous people who might be interested in becoming accountants. So maybe you don't have to work in Victoria or Vancouver. Maybe you can work in your community, and maybe there is a way to of doing that. But certainly, as an FCPA myself, I'm always happy to go out and talk with groups if groups will will find that useful and helpful in terms of career advice and thoughts as well. But, you know, it is a wonderful profession, and certainly as an Auditor General, you know, I've spent days in prisons. I've climbed container ships out in the ocean. I've been in submarine mines. I've all kinds of fascinating and wonderful things that really make this, you know, a super interesting career.
Well, Michael, great work. It was great to see you again. Thanks for taking some time for us today.
Happy to do it. Thank you for your interest, and always happy to come back if you feel if I can be of any help at any point.
Great to hear all about those firsts. And even though we're out of time for this week's In Focus, we'd love to hear more about Indigenous firsts. So you can reach out with your story by contacting us via aptnnews.ca or by commenting on our APTN In Focus Twitter page or on the APTN News Facebook page. Of course, if you want to watch this episode again or check out a past episode, you'll always find those over on our APTN News website. And if you want to listen to today's episode, it'll be available as a podcast. Download those wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Daryl's back next week, and he'll be joined by members of our investigative unit. Big thanks to Charmaine, Tamara, and Holly for their work on this week's show. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. Well, I'll actually see you back here in about 2 hours for the APTN National News.